In the northern port city of Tianjin, beneath dazzling light shows and streets crowded with eager onlookers, history is unfolding. For the first time in 7 years, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has set foot on Chinese soil. His meeting with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit carries weight far beyond ceremonial gestures. After years of mistrust, skirmishes, and bitter rhetoric, both leaders are now speaking the language of partnership. Xi's words, "partners not rivals," and Modi's declaration of an atmosphere of peace and stability, are being closely watched not only in Asia, but across the globe. This encounter comes at a pivotal moment. India and China, together home to more than 2.5 billion people and boasting two of the world's largest economies, have long struggled to balance rivalry with cooperation. The backdrop of their dialogue is complex: a bloody border clash in the Himalayas in 2020, suspended air links, and deep suspicion between their militaries. And yet, on this stage in Tianjin, there are signs of a thaw. Modi's announcement that flights between the two countries will soon resume, though without a firm date, symbolizes a tentative but meaningful step towards rebuilding normalcy. The timing of this summit cannot be ignored. The United States under President Donald Trump has escalated trade wars, imposing steep tariffs on Indian goods in retaliation for Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil. Russia, under President Vladimir Putin, arrives at the same gathering facing the weight of Western sanctions tied to the ongoing war in Ukraine. It is within this triangle of pressures, Washington's economic muscle, Moscow's isolation, and Beijing's global ambitions, that New Delhi now maneuvers. Modi's engagement with Xi can be read as both necessity and opportunity. The SCO Summit itself is more symbolic than substantive. Founded in 2001 by China, Russia, and 4 Central Asian states, it was designed as a counterweight to Western alliances like NATO. Over 2 decades later, it has grown to include 10 member states and 16 partners and observers. Yet its true power lies in optics, in shared declarations of solidarity, and in presenting a united front against what these countries often describe as Western hegemony. Tianjin Summit is the largest in its history, with over 20 world leaders present, and it comes just days before Beijing unveils a massive military parade to mark 80 years since the end of World War II. Tianjin itself has transformed into a showcase city. With its 13 million residents told to restrict movement and its streets locked down for visiting motorcades, it has become a living theater for diplomacy. Tower blocks blaze with synchronized lights. Tens of thousands crowd riversides to witness the spectacle, and banners drape across the city to emphasize the moment's historic weight. For the Chinese leadership, the summit underscores not just regional influence, but a vision of global leadership. For India, the equation is more delicate. The United States, once hailed as a strategic partner, is now exerting pressure over energy and trade. Russia remains a vital arms supplier, but is mired in international condemnation. China, though a neighbor with whom relations have often been fraught, represents both a competitor and a potential partner. The convergence of these dynamics makes this meeting between Xi and Modi one of the most consequential in recent years. The question now being asked from Beijing to Washington is clear: will India and China remain trapped in cycles of rivalry, or will this new atmosphere of peace and stability open the door to an era of cautious but necessary cooperation? The comparison between India and China has often been framed as a race, two vast nations with ancient civilizations, huge populations, and aspirations of global power. Yet, while China surged ahead to become the world's manufacturing hub and the second largest economy, India has struggled with uneven growth, bureaucratic hurdles, and political constraints. Understanding why China succeeded while India faltered requires a closer look at governance, strategy, and historical choices. China's success has been anchored in centralized decision-making. The Chinese Communist Party, with its ability to mobilize resources and enforce long-term policies, turned the country into an export powerhouse from the late 20th century onward. Special economic zones, infrastructure megaprojects, and a relentless focus on manufacturing created a system capable of lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. By tightly controlling political dissent, Beijing ensured stability for its economic experiment, albeit at the cost of freedoms. India's journey has been far more fragmented. Its democratic framework, while a source of pride, has often meant political compromises and delayed reforms. Coalition governments, regional rivalries, and bureaucratic red tape slowed down progress. Infrastructure gaps, poor roads, unreliable electricity, and congested ports kept India from becoming the global factory that China became. While India has strengths in information, technology, and services, these sectors have not generated jobs at the scale manufacturing did for China. Foreign policy choices also played a role. China aligned itself strategically with global supply chains, offering cheap labor and incentives to foreign firms. India, on the other hand, maintained protectionist policies for too long, missing the early wave of globalization. While both nations faced poverty and illiteracy, China's aggressive education and health campaigns created a healthier, more skilled workforce at scale. Culturally, too, there is a difference in governance philosophy. China emphasized collective goals, often subordinating individual freedoms to state objectives. India, deeply pluralistic, had to balance diverse interests and safeguard democratic norms, slowing down decisive action. Today, China is ahead not just economically but also in military strength, infrastructure, and diplomatic influence. India is catching up, but the gap remains wide. The SCO Summit symbolizes a rare moment where both nations might step away from rivalry. Yet the underlying reality is that China succeeded in building a foundation for superpower status, while India, though rising, is still wrestling with challenges that its neighbor overcame decades earlier. The words "partners, not rivals," spoken by Xi Jinping, carry weight far beyond diplomacy. For decades, India and China have been cast as inevitable competitors, two giants vying for influence across Asia, locked in disputes over territory, trade, and power. Yet the Tianjin Summit marks a rhetorical shift, where both leaders appear willing to reset the tone of their relationship. This is not the first attempt. Past dialogues, including informal summits between Modi and Xi, promised greater understanding but fell apart after clashes along the Himalayan border. The 2020 violence in Galwan Valley, which left soldiers dead on both sides, froze ties and fueled nationalist anger. Resuming flights between the two countries, announced by Modi in Tianjin, may seem minor but signals a practical first step toward rebuilding contact. The driving force behind this pivot is necessity. India faces mounting pressure from the United States, its supposed strategic partner, which has imposed tariffs and expressed disapproval over energy ties with Russia. For New Delhi, balancing relations with Washington, Moscow, and Beijing is becoming increasingly difficult. For China, meanwhile, prolonged tensions with India risk undermining its regional ambitions and pushing India deeper into Western alliances. Both leaders recognize that rivalry serves neither side. Trust, however, is fragile. Deep structural mistrust remains, especially along the border. Military deployments continue in disputed areas, and nationalists in both countries view each other with suspicion. Building true partnership will require more than warm words. It will require mechanisms to prevent escalation, transparent trade policies, and cultural exchanges that humanize the other. The Tianjin Summit offers a symbolic but important reset. If China and India can frame their relationship in terms of cooperation rather than confrontation, they could unlock vast potential in trade, climate cooperation, and regional stability. Together, they represent nearly 3 billion people and a combined economic weight that can reshape global institutions. Yet the challenge lies in consistency. History shows that goodwill between Beijing and New Delhi often dissolves when strategic interests collide. Partners, not rivals, is a powerful statement, but the test will be whether it survives beyond the summit halls and translates into sustained, peaceful engagement. The SCO Summit cannot be understood in isolation. Its timing coincides with intensifying global tensions, trade wars, sanctions, and shifting alliances. For India and China, their dialogue is shaped as much by Washington and Moscow as by their bilateral concerns. President Donald Trump's tariffs on Indian goods, justified as punishment for Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil, have strained relations between the world's largest democracy and the world's largest economy. What was once celebrated as a growing U.S.-India partnership is now clouded with distrust. For India, which relies on Russian defense equipment and energy, cutting ties with Moscow is not feasible. Yet, this exposes it to American economic retaliation, narrowing its strategic options. China, on the other hand, finds itself increasingly aligned with Russia, presenting an alternative to Western-led structures. President Vladimir Putin's presence in Tianjin, despite sanctions and global criticism of his Ukraine war, underscores this alignment. For Beijing, projecting solidarity with Moscow while courting India strengthens its image as a leader of a multipolar world order. This creates a delicate position for Modi. By warming ties with Xi, he signals to Washington that India has options. At the same time, he reassures Moscow that India will not abandon its old ally. This balancing act is familiar in Indian diplomacy, but the stakes are higher now. With over 20 world leaders present, every handshake and statement is scrutinized for signals of shifting power. The United States views both China and Russia as strategic competitors and India as a potential counterbalance. But India's presence in the SCO, an organization explicitly created as a counterweight to Western influence, complicates that vision. Modi's outreach to Xi suggests that India will not be a simple extension of Washington's strategy, but rather a player pursuing its own multipolar vision. In this sense, the Tianjin meeting reflects a broader truth. The world is no longer defined by binary alliances of the Cold War era. Instead, nations are navigating overlapping partnerships, leveraging rivalries, and seeking autonomy in an increasingly fragmented global order. The SCO is not about binding treaties, but about signaling that the West is not the sole center of power. And India's closeness to China at this moment speaks volumes about how much the global balance is shifting. Beyond the diplomatic statements and policy discussions, the SCO Summit in Tianjin is a theater of symbolism. Every detail, the light shows along the river, the banners across the city, the packed crowds on Jifeng Bridge, was designed to send a message. That message is clear. China is positioning itself as the convening power of the new century. The SCO, founded in 2001, has often been dismissed as a talk shop. Yet its gatherings matter because they project an alternative vision of world order. This year's summit, the largest since its founding, showcases China's ability to gather Russia, India, Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asian states under one roof. It demonstrates Beijing's diplomatic reach at a time when Western-led forums like the G7 and NATO dominate headlines. For the people of Tianjin, the summit has transformed daily life. Taxi services suspended, streets locked down, and residents advised to shop locally rather than move freely, yet enthusiasm remains high. Tens of thousands gather at night to watch skyscrapers glow with choreographed light shows, embracing the spectacle of history in the making. This popular participation, carefully managed, serves to reinforce the legitimacy of the Chinese state and its claim that it is leading not only a nation, but a movement. The decision to hold the summit just before a military parade commemorating 80 years since the end of World War 2 also matters. It ties China's modern leadership to its historical role in resisting imperialism and positions the SCO as part of that legacy of sovereignty and independence from Western dominance. By welcoming Vladimir Putin with a red carpet and engaging Narendra Modi in friendly talks, Beijing highlights its ability to host both allies and rivals in the same arena. For India, participation is both opportunity and risk. It gains visibility and influence, but risks being seen as aligning too closely with China and Russia at a time of American hostility. For Russia, it is a stage to show that it is not isolated, that despite sanctions and condemnation, it remains central to global gatherings. For China, it is a triumph of diplomacy and spectacle, reminding the world that global power is no longer unipolar. The symbolism of Tianjin extends beyond this week. It is a signal that Asia, with its vast populations and dynamic economies, is asserting itself not as a subordinate region, but as the arena where the future balance of power will be decided.